Memphis, Tennessee, December 1851. A rain-slick auction block near the Mississippi River glistened beneath a bruised winter sky as if the city itself recoiled from what was about to unfold. Traders huddled beneath dripping awnings, their ledgers soaking in the downpour, while wealthy bidders muttered impatiently about schedules and riverboats. Yet everyone would later remember this moment as the spark that ignited one of the strangest commercial scandals in antebellum history. A single slave, one whose appearance defied every convention of the trade, was sold for a price so staggering it seemed almost fabricated. That sale, whispered about for decades afterward, would set off a chain of ruin that dismantled three of Memphis's most powerful families. Within months, fortunes collapsed, alliances shattered, and reputations that once dominated Front Street dissolved into disgrace. More perplexing still, the man who purchased the slave disappeared without explanation, leaving behind only fragments of a journal filled with cryptic warnings. And when researchers later combed through the city's newspapers for clues, they discovered missing pages, whole weeks gone as if someone had deliberately erased the truth. To understand why this slave commanded a price that bordered on madness, one must first grasp the world he was thrust into. The spring of 1851 found Memphis intoxicated by its own prosperity, newly confident in its position as a titan of the cotton economy. Riverboats crowded the docks with bales stacked to the sky, while auction houses rose like gleaming temples to wealth along Front Street. Inside their colonnaded halls, human beings were inspected with clinical efficiency, their fates settled by the rhythm of bids and the clatter of ink-stained quills. Three families towered above the city's elite: the Harringtons, the Daltons, and the Cavendishes. Edmund Harrington, once a Virginia aristocrat, commanded vast warehouses and had built an empire fed by strategy and ruthlessness. Jacob Dalton, through relentless ambition, had become Memphis's most discreet and effective broker. Richard Cavendish, carrying the prestige of Charleston money, stitched together powerful networks that reached from New Orleans to New York. Their rivalry hovered behind every business deal, masked by polite smiles but fueled by ambitions sharpened like knives. In this climate of wealth and competition, rumors began to swirl during the first chill of November. A Carolina trader named Ambrose Fletcher, infamous for mysterious acquisitions rather than high-volume sales, had arrived quietly in the city. Unlike other traders who advertised loudly to attract crowds, Fletcher lodged in an unremarkable boarding house on Madison Avenue and spoke to no one about what he carried. His silence drew attention faster than any proclamation could. Men whispered in private rooms, leaning close as if revealing sacred knowledge. The talk centered on a young slave whose appearance was described in language that bordered on reverence. Some claimed his features were carved with impossible symmetry. Others insisted his eyes held an unsettling intelligence rarely seen in bondage. A few said merely standing near him produced a sensation difficult to name, a mix of awe, curiosity, and discomfort. The tale reached Charles Harrington during a late-night card game, carried by a merchant who swore he had seen the slave and been struck speechless. Charles dismissed it as drunken exaggeration, yet the details clung to him like burrs. Curiosity won out. Charles sought Fletcher and arranged a private viewing, expecting nothing more than a handsome house servant inflated by rumor. Instead, he encountered something he could not easily explain. Fletcher's cramped room smelled faintly of damp timber and lamp oil as he introduced the young man named Marcus. The slave stepped forward with unremarkable clothing yet extraordinary bearing. He was tall, slender, and moved with a fluid precision that resembled trained refinement rather than servitude. His skin carried a warm golden tone. His face held a symmetry so precise it seemed engineered rather than born. But it was his eyes, grey-green and shifting in the lamplight, that unsettled Charles most. They flickered with awareness, restraint, and something deeper, something that made Charles question whether he was evaluating the slave or being evaluated himself. Marcus wore no chains, bore no marks of discipline, and held his posture with quiet confidence. In that moment, Charles felt a strange mixture of admiration and unease, recognizing that this man was unlike anyone who had ever stood on an auction block. Fletcher claimed Marcus could read and write in English and French, manage accounts, oversee household operations, and perform music with skill. His history, Fletcher said, was complicated, a vague statement that stirred suspicion. Charles examined Marcus's hands, unscarred, refined, the hands of someone accustomed to instruments or letters rather than toil. When ordered to raise his gaze, Marcus revealed eyes that seemed to search Charles's soul. Against logic, Charles felt compelled to trust his instincts. This slave was either the most dangerous deception he had ever encountered or the most remarkable opportunity. Fletcher demanded $3,000, a price so outrageous it bordered on insult. Yet Charles found himself agreeing. The prospect of presenting Marcus to Memphis society, of outshining the Dalton sisters or the Cavendish pianist, inflamed his ambition. Within 24 hours, the papers were signed. Marcus was officially a Harrington acquisition. What Charles could not know, what no one in Memphis could foresee, was how this single transaction would become the spark that ignited a scandal powerful enough to unravel lives, fortunes, and secrets long buried beneath polished Southern respectability. The Harrington mansion welcomed Marcus into a world of ivory columns, imported chandeliers, and carefully curated displays of wealth. Edmund Harrington, prepared to berate his son for reckless spending, found his anger evaporate when he saw Marcus in the parlor's glow. The older man circled him slowly, analyzing every detail, and soon recognized that this acquisition could elevate the family's standing in ways money alone could not. Marcus was assigned quarters near Edmund's private study, an unprecedented privilege that unsettled the household staff. Servants whispered about his presence, uncertain whether he was a prized ornament or something far more unusual. Yet Marcus adapted seamlessly, performing tasks with precision and displaying a discipline that bordered on uncanny. Guests noticed him immediately at dinner parties, praising his elegance, questioning his origins, and sensing something they could not articulate. Edmund began quiet inquiries into Marcus's past, but the answers that trickled back only deepened the mystery. No record of his supposed previous owner existed. No family by the name on his documents appeared in Richmond. It was as if Marcus had emerged from thin air. Marcus's presence quickly became the quiet center of gravity within the Harrington household, shifting the atmosphere in ways no one fully understood. He performed his duties with the precision of a seasoned steward, organizing Edmund's chaotic correspondence in mere days and anticipating requests before they were spoken. Guests marveled at him during dinners, their fascination cloaked in polite curiosity, yet beneath their admiration lay something sharper: envy, desire, suspicion. Even Edmund, usually impenetrable, felt a growing unease he could not name. Marcus's refinement did not feel learned. It felt innate, as though he were not simply a slave educated beyond reason, but a man born to inhabit rooms such as these. Concerned by this dissonance, Edmund continued his inquiries into Marcus's origins. The name Eleanor Stratton, printed on the transfer papers, yielded no results. No estates, no family records, no trace in Charleston or Richmond. The deeper Edmund searched, the more he sensed a fabricated past designed to obscure something far more dangerous than he anticipated. Yet every unanswered question only drew him further into the young man's quiet enigma. Charles, meanwhile, found himself increasingly troubled by his own reactions to Marcus. He had purchased slaves before, efficient field hands, discreet house servants, even the occasional educated domestic, but never had one occupied his thoughts beyond functionality. Marcus was different. Conversations with him revealed intellect, subtle wit, and a perception sharp enough to make Charles feel exposed in ways he had never experienced. Marcus's responses were always respectful, but layered with careful evasion, as if protecting truths too volatile to share. Charles began lingering near the East Wing under the guise of checking on his father's paperwork, though he knew full well he was drawn by curiosity, perhaps even admiration. He hated himself a little for that. In Memphis society, a man of his standing was expected to control his household, not be captivated by someone legally considered property. But something about Marcus's calm composure made Charles question the boundaries he'd always accepted. In quiet moments he wondered what kind of life could shape a man like Marcus, and why someone would hide it. The other slaves observed Marcus with a mix of caution and resentment. His position in the East Wing, so close to Edmund's private study, created a divide none of them could reconcile. Bess, the long-serving housekeeper, found herself unsettled by Marcus in a way she could not articulate. She told Judith, the cook, that sometimes Marcus watched the household with an attentiveness that felt unnatural, as though he were gathering information rather than performing tasks. Judith agreed, noting that Marcus never gossiped or confided in anyone, choosing instead to move like a silent witness through the mansion's daily rhythms. Rumors spread quietly among the servants, rumors that Marcus carried secrets, that he knew things no slave should know, that he possessed a confidence no amount of refinement could explain. Some believed he was dangerous, though no one could agree on why, but all sensed that he was waiting for something, preparing for something, as if his time in the household was merely a pause between two far more important chapters. In early January 1852, the fragile calm shattered when Jacob Dalton arrived unannounced at the Harrington estate. Charles and Edmund found him pacing the study with the agitation of a man cornered by desperation. Dalton wasted no time with pleasantries. He demanded to purchase Marcus, offering the staggering sum of $5,000. When Edmund refused, Dalton raised the offer to $6,000, nearly double the original price. The numbers were shocking, even obscene, and Edmund immediately questioned Dalton's motives. The broker's evasiveness only heightened suspicion. Dalton claimed that Marcus possessed qualities far beyond beauty or refinement, qualities certain collectors would pay fortunes for. The mention of collectors, spoken in that hushed tone, sent a chill down Edmund's spine. When Dalton finally confessed that Richard Cavendish had offered him a bribe to steal Marcus outright, Edmund felt the ground shift beneath him. The rivalry among Memphis elites had always been vicious, but theft, desperation. Cavendish's involvement changed everything. Dalton's final revelation struck hardest. Rumors of a wealthy Virginia family who had recently lost a son under mysterious circumstances. A son known for his striking appearance, his refinement, his education. A son whose disappearance had been buried with suspicious efficiency. The family name, Thornton, eerily close to the Eleanor Stratton listed on Marcus's papers. Dalton suggested what Edmund had already begun to suspect. Marcus might not be a slave at all. He might be a free-born man illegally sold into bondage. The implications were catastrophic. Purchasing an illegally enslaved free man was a criminal act that threatened imprisonment, ruin, and social annihilation. The Harrington name would disintegrate under the weight of such a scandal. After Dalton left, Edmund summoned Marcus to the study, the letter of suspicion burning in his mind. What followed shattered the last remnants of the illusion Edmund had clung to since the day of the purchase. When confronted, Marcus did not deny the truth. He revealed that his real name was Marcus Thornton and that he had been born free in Virginia, educated in a household where refinement was expected, not taught. His enslavement had been orchestrated by his own family, desperate to conceal debts and scandals the public must never learn. Betrayed by those who should have protected him, stripped of legal recourse, Marcus had been sold to Fletcher with fabricated documents. Edmund's outrage at the deception clashed with guilt he could no longer ignore. Everything Marcus said aligned with Fletcher's evasions and Dalton's warnings. But when Edmund demanded why Marcus had said nothing during the sale, Marcus answered with cold clarity, no one would have believed him. A slave's testimony meant nothing besides stamped papers and a broker's word. Edmund recognized the harsh truth. The very system he had upheld made Marcus's silence necessary, even rational. And now, with Cavendish circling and Dalton growing desperate, Marcus offered Edmund the only solution that protected them both. He would disappear. The morning after Marcus revealed his true identity, the Harrington household simmered with tension. Edmund moved through his obligations with rigid focus, determined to maintain the appearance of normalcy while concealing the chaos beneath. Charles sensed something had shifted, but didn't yet grasp its scale. Marcus continued his duties with perfect composure, never hinting at the storm gathering around him. Yet every subtle glance he exchanged with Edmund signaled urgency, a silent understanding that time was running thin. The plan for Marcus's disappearance had to be executed with precision, without triggering the suspicions of Dalton or Cavendish. Edmund requested his son gather intelligence on Cavendish's activities, hoping to understand how far the man's desperation had spiraled. Charles learned quickly that Cavendish had overextended himself financially, pouring money into risky ventures that had collapsed. This explained his obsession with acquiring Marcus. Leverage over the Thornton family could salvage his faltering empire, but even that knowledge did little to calm the growing dread that something irreversible was approaching. 2 days before Marcus was meant to vanish, Memphis erupted with scandal. The The Cavendish warehouse near the riverfront caught fire in the dead of night, reducing a fortune of goods to smouldering ruin. The blaze was fierce enough to light the river like a furnace, drawing crowds of horrified spectators. Richard Cavendish escaped with burns to his face and hands, insisting he had rushed inside to save vital business records. Many whispered otherwise. Some claimed he had set the fire himself to collect insurance money. Others believed creditors had sent a violent warning. But the truth was more sinister still. The fire was no accident. It was a deliberate distraction. Someone had timed the disaster to occupy Cavendish at the precise moment another scheme was unfolding. While the flames consumed his warehouse, a different player made their move on the Harrington estate. The household awoke to the news that Marcus had vanished without a trace. His room was immaculate, his belongings untouched, no sign of struggle or forced entry. Only one detail stood out. A witness claimed to have seen a carriage with Dalton markings rolling quietly away at dawn. Edmund's fury erupted the moment he heard the report. His first assumption was that Jacob Dalton had betrayed him, acting before the promised 3-day deadline. But when he confronted Dalton, the truth shattered that theory. Dalton's eldest son had died suddenly the previous night, an inexplicable death attributed to seizure or apoplexy. Dalton had spent the morning arranging the funeral, broken and overwhelmed. He had not ordered any carriage, nor had he sent anyone to retrieve Marcus. The revelation chilled Edmund. If Dalton was not responsible, then someone masquerading behind Dalton's name had orchestrated the abduction. It was a bold, calculated move, one that required access to information Edmund believed only a handful of trusted people possessed. Suspicion turned toward Richard Cavendish, but he was bedridden, severely burned, and incapable of executing or coordinating such a quiet extraction. That left a far more unsettling possibility. Someone else had been watching the Harringtons closely, someone neither man had considered, someone working with precision and purpose none of them understood, and that someone now had Marcus. To uncover the truth, the three families reluctantly hired a notorious slave catcher named Silas Ketch. Known for his brutal efficiency and talent for tracking even the most elusive fugitives, Ketch studied Marcus's description with unsettling interest. He examined the daguerreotype Charles had obtained, his expression tightening as if recognizing the immense value of the young man. Ketch's investigation led him into the countryside northeast of Memphis, to an abandoned plantation long rumored to house squatters and drifters. What he found there was far from a den of vagrants. The property had been meticulously maintained, with signs of recent habitation, food stores replenished, embers cooling in the hearth, documents organized in neat stacks. The inhabitants had vanished just days earlier, but Ketch discovered something far more alarming. Tucked inside the study of the old plantation house were files, letters, and personal ledgers detailing the private sins of Memphis's wealthiest families. Illegal slave purchases, falsified transfers, hidden dealings with corrupt officials, evidence so damning it could collapse legacies built over decades. When Ketch returned to Memphis, he gathered Edmund, Cavendish, and Dalton, though Dalton was barely coherent from grief, and presented the documents. Then he revealed the final, devastating truth. The person who had taken Marcus was a woman. She had left behind a letter addressed to all three men. It was written by Eleanor Thornton, the mother Marcus had claimed sold him into bondage. Except now, her letter told a different story. Eleanor had not sold her son. She had been fighting to retrieve him ever since he disappeared. She accused each man of complicity in his illegal trafficking, outlining the roles they played, whether knowingly or through willful ignorance. Her intentions were no longer hidden. She had gathered enough evidence to destroy all three families completely. Yet she offered them a choice: comply with her demands for reparations or watch their lives disintegrate in public scandal. The room grew cold as the men absorbed her message. The game they thought they controlled was now in someone else's hands, someone smarter, angrier, and far more prepared. The days that followed Eleanor Thornton's ultimatum plunged Memphis's elite into chaos. Each family received personalized instructions detailing the reparation Eleanor demanded, and each set of terms struck like a blow designed to cripple its target. Jacob Dalton's letter required a notarized confession of illegally trafficking a freeborn man into slavery, along with a staggering payment meant to support education and opportunities for formerly enslaved individuals. The demand wasn't merely financial. It was annihilation of his legacy. Dalton spent hours rereading the letter in his study, his grief over his son's sudden death collapsing into a deeper despair. His business, reputation, and honor teetered on the brink. To comply meant public humiliation. To refuse meant criminal exposure. The choice was no choice at all. His wife found him at dawn the next morning, hanging from a rope, a confession pinned to his chest. The scandal swept through the city like a storm. Whispers fluttered through taverns and parlors, speculation growing while the truth remained locked in household chambers. Yet Eleanor's plan had claimed its first casualty. Richard Cavendish faced his own unraveling. His letter required financial restitution, the dismantling of his business dealings, and a public withdrawal from exclusive social institutions, a punishment engineered to shatter his social supremacy. Victoria Cavendish reacted with fury, smashing crystal and screaming that they would never submit to a woman who dared threaten the aristocracy. But Richard, weakened by burns and drowning under debts, felt the pressure closing in. He traveled to Nashville seeking allies and refuge, but whatever protection he hoped to secure vanished when he was found dead in his hotel room. Officials cited heart failure, but bruises on his neck and signs of a struggle suggested a more violent end. Victoria insisted it was murder, muttering about hired thugs or rivals seeking advantage. Others whispered darker theories, that those Richard had employed to hunt Eleanor turned on him when payment seemed uncertain. Regardless of cause, his death shattered the Cavendish household. Victoria retreated into isolation, fighting off investigators and creditors as the city quietly turned its back on her once powerful name. With Dalton dead and Cavendish buried, Edmund Harrington stood alone under the weight of Eleanor's demands. His letter required him to free all 16 Harrington slaves, provide each with documentation and financial support, and resign from influential banking positions that enabled slave-based collateral. These weren't mere gestures. They dismantled the foundation of Harrington wealth. Edmund spent sleepless nights walking the halls of the mansion, every footstep echoing with guilt he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge until now. Charles watched his father's torment with growing dread, feeling both compassion and distance. When they finally met in the study to discuss the terms, Edmund admitted he saw no path forward except compliance. Charles argued that surrender would destroy them, that they should fight as Victoria demanded, yet he struggled to ignore the moral reckoning gnawing at him. The world was changing, abolitionist pressures growing, and the old ways no longer felt certain. He found himself split between duty to his family and the uneasy respect Marcus had awakened in him. Edmund attempted secret negotiations, reaching out through intermediaries and coded notes in hopes of persuading Eleanor to spare his family from total ruin. To his astonishment, she agreed to a meeting. The location was a small church on the outskirts of Memphis, abandoned during weekdays and known only to local parishioners. Edmund and Charles arrived armed but cautious, stepping into a sanctuary washed in pale winter light filtering through cracked windows. Eleanor Thornton waited near the altar, her posture calm but unyielding. Marcus stood beside her, no longer a servant but a free man who had reclaimed his identity. Charles felt a jolt of shock at how different Marcus seemed, still graceful, still composed, but carrying himself with a confidence and authority that had been veiled in the Harrington household. Eleanor wasted no time. She clarified that Dalton's death was his own doing and hinted that Richard's end resulted from entanglements with violent men he had hired during his desperate hunt for her. She denied involvement in either event, though her serene demeanor left Edmund uncertain whether she told the whole truth. Their negotiation was tense, a fragile balance of remorse, anger, and survival. Edmund admitted the depth of his wrongs, acknowledging that he had ignored the warning signs surrounding Marcus's purchase because he valued status more than humanity. He begged Eleanor to direct the consequences at him alone, rather than punishing innocent dependents. Eleanor listened, her expression unreadable. Charles, compelled by a complex mix of guilt and admiration, confessed that Marcus had forced him to confront beliefs he'd never questioned. Eleanor responded with a revised offer. Edmund would still free his slaves and resign from his banking roles, but she would not require public acknowledgement of his involvement in Marcus's trafficking. Her concession preserved a sliver of the family's reputation, mercy extended only because Charles had shown a rare moment of honest self-reflection. Marcus, for his part, announced he would begin a new life in the north. intent on using his experience to fight for those similarly betrayed. He did not forgive Edmund, but he recognized that vengeance could not heal what had been broken, and so the Harringtons were given a single chance to salvage what remained. In the weeks following the meeting at the abandoned church, Memphis society continued its daily rhythm, unaware of the quiet undoing happening behind the doors of the Harrington estate. Edmund moved swiftly to carry out Eleanor's revised terms, freeing every enslaved person under his ownership and granting each the documentation and financial support required to begin anew. Some accepted the assistance with gratitude, others with suspicion, and a few left the property without a word, unwilling to trust any gesture made by a man who had once held authority over their lives. Charles watched these departures with a mix of shame and relief, understanding for the first time how deeply his family's legacy was intertwined with suffering. Gossip circulated across the city, but with Edmund withholding the true reason behind his actions, rumors took on gentler shapes: financial missteps, failing investments, strategic withdrawals. Without Eleanor's public exposure, the Harrington name bent but did not break. They slipped quietly from the top tier of Memphis society into a position of muted respectability, their wealth diminished, but their existence preserved. The fates of the Dalton and Cavendish families, however, bore the full force of Eleanor's storm. Dalton's suicide initiated investigations that unearthed layers of financial misconduct even Eleanor hadn't documented. Creditors descended on the estate, dismantling what remained of his empire. His widow fled Memphis in disgrace, taking her surviving children north in hopes of outrunning the scandal. Richard Cavendish's death, though officially declared natural, left behind a labyrinth of unresolved debts, forged signatures and illicit business dealings. Victoria fought desperately to preserve fragments of their reputation, but the aristocratic circles that once welcomed her now whispered behind gloved hands. When she relocated to New Orleans, she brought with her only the smallest remnants of her former life. By 1856, she died in quiet poverty, her downfall serving as a warning to anyone who believed wealth and lineage granted invincibility. In the wake of these families' collapse, Memphis moved on, its collective memory quick to bury scandals that threatened the illusion of Southern refinement. As for Marcus, his trail grew faint once he and Eleanor left Tennessee. Some claimed the pair traveled through Kentucky under assumed names. Others insisted they settled for a time in Pennsylvania, assisted by sympathetic abolitionists. What is known with modest certainty is that Eleanor died in Philadelphia in 1859, her obituary describing her only as a widow devoted to charity and the welfare of formerly enslaved people. Marcus's own path became more myth than record. Reports surfaced in Boston of a man with grey-green eyes practicing law, representing individuals caught in legal webs similar to his own past. Another account placed him on the Underground Railroad, guiding families across dangerous boundaries to freedom. None of these stories were verified, yet all bore enough resemblance to his character to seem plausible. For many, Marcus became a symbol of something larger, a reminder that even in a world built on bondage, some individuals carried within them a resilience that refused to be extinguished. His existence challenged every assumption held by the society that once sought to own him. Over the years, whispers of the Memphis enigma occasionally surfaced among historians, archivists, and amateur researchers digging into antebellum mysteries. Some stumbled upon letters hinting at the missing newspaper records from 1851 and 1852, suggesting someone deliberately removed evidence from public view. Others found traces of Eleanor's carefully organized files, documents that catalogued the sins of Memphis's elite with an archivist's precision. But the full collection of papers she compiled, the evidence that held the power to destroy entire dynasties, was never recovered. Some believed she destroyed them before her death to protect Marcus. Others suspected the documents still existed somewhere in a forgotten trunk, a private collection, or an attic untouched for generations. Regardless of where the truth lay, the absence of those files only deepened the aura surrounding the case. What remained was not a complete historical narrative, but a constellation of fragments, letters, rumors, and testimonies that together formed a shadowed outline of the events that unfolded. The true legacy of the Marcus Thornton affair was not in the downfall of families or the silencing of secrets, but in the uncomfortable truth it revealed about antebellum America. Memphis had been a city built on wealth extracted from human lives, a place where beauty, intelligence, and dignity could be appraised and auctioned like any other commodity. Marcus's story exposed the fragility of that world, showing how a single crack, one freeborn man stolen into bondage, could splinter entire households, topple fortunes, and unmask the moral decay beneath polished southern manners. Though the city buried the scandal with deliberate haste, the echoes endured in small, persistent ways. Every generation has stories it would rather forget, and the Memphis enigma became one of them. Yet for those who hear the whispers and feel the weight of what happened in those rain-soaked months of 1851 and 1852, it remains a haunting reminder of how power corrupts, how secrets rot from within, and how the pursuit of wealth without conscience can collapse into ruin. And so, as we close this chapter of forgotten history, consider the lengths people will go to protect their reputations and the greater courage required to confront the truth they tried to bury.